of The Higher Ground on the Wrazel Cannabis Broadcasting Network. I'm your host, Farah. I'm here today with guest Jeffrey Kahn, a tax attorney in the cannabis industry. I'm looking forward to chatting with him a little bit about concerns and pitfalls, things that you should be aware of within this space. First, we're going to take a quick break and hear from our sponsor.
The Wicked Roots mission is to unlock the healing power of cannabis and create trusted, safe, and highly effective wellness products. They firmly believe that cannabinoids and terpenes found in cannabis and hemp have the potential to positively impact millions of lives, and their team is dedicated to making this a reality. Utilizing proprietary DNA, the Wicked Root offers a brand of pharmaceutical-grade CBD products people can rely on. The Wicked Root team utilizes a full-spectrum CBD base infused with select terpenes to create optimal, science-backed formulas that are consistent and deliver targeted effects. To learn more about the Wicked Root, visit thewickedroot.com, or for more on their current investment opportunity, find Wicked Root in the Wrazel investment marketplace at wrazel.com.
Welcome back. This is The Higher Ground on the Wrazel Cannabis Broadcasting Network. I'm your host, Farah, and today I'm here with Jeffrey Kahn, a tax attorney in the cannabis industry. Jeff, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll get into our topics for today?
Sure, Farah. Well, thank you for having me. So I'm a board-certified tax attorney. I've been practicing tax law for 31 years now, and about 4 years ago I got into cannabis, and it was kind of like by accident that I got into it. What happened was a client came to me who had unreported income for many years, and so he wanted to come forward, which what we do is we file what's called a voluntary disclosure. So this way you can come forward to the IRS without having to worry about criminal prosecution, and then determine what the liability is and make arrangements to get that paid, and you have a clean slate. So he came to me a few years ago, and at that time, California just legalized recreational marijuana. So I thought, well, cannabis is going to be a big thing in this state. How can I take my skill set, such as the example that I just described, and bring it to the cannabis industry? Because I'm sure anyone who's been involved in cannabis and has experience in cannabis has that experience while they were not legal, and maybe they were not reporting things to the IRS or whatever. So I thought that to be a great segue on how to come into this industry, and so I started reading up more, learning things, networking with people and stuff, to be in a situation where now over the last 4 years I've got good experience and good mindset in terms of what pitfalls should be avoided and stuff like that, because I'm basically bringing in mistakes that other people made and using that experience to be able to help clients in the future.
Yeah, because you have a background as both a CPA and a tax attorney, so you're really well versed in all of that. And
Yes.
we know that cannabis can be a really tricky area when it comes to dealing with
That
the
is
IRS.
true, and numbers don't scare me either. My father's a CPA, and he taught me early on. He said, Jeffrey, he said, when you look at a financial statement, those numbers should be telling you a story. So
So you're prepared from
yes,
day one.
I am.
Well, it's good because there's a lot of people who are not comfortable with numbers. And certainly I think overall in this industry, because it's a new legal industry, there's been a real challenge for so many people making that transition. So to have, somebody in their court who knows the numbers and is comfortable with it is something that always ends up being really important, and especially as it interplays with the regulations themselves. There's like the numbers, and then there's the law, which is another really scary thing for a lot of people.
Right. Well, the whole point is we've got multiple agencies that if you're going to go into cannabis, whether you're a cultivator, a manufacturer, retailer, distributor, you're going to have so many different agencies that govern you. And a lot of people who I find, at least going into this business, their focus is more on, okay, what do I need to get the license? What do I need to open up doors so I can start generating revenues? And nobody's thinking, or very few people think at the back end, well, how is this all going to get reported to the government? What kind of taxes am I going to be looking at? What can I do to minimize those costs, to minimize that exposure, to be prepared for what would be a pretty well much certain audit by the IRS. And the time to think about those things is at the beginning and not later on at the end. And now you've got investors that are not upset, and perhaps maybe they were misrepresented, and that could end up leading out to additional lawsuits and stuff. So it can be a real nightmare.
Yeah, well, I think there's also, it seems like there's a lot of circumstances down the line where you're going to want to have had your finances in order and your books in order from the early days. And I think a lot of companies, it's really overwhelming at the beginning, especially as it relates to these fields of both, I think, legal department. One thing I always talk about is it was important to have a general counsel or hire legal leadership for your team. And I think obviously your finance and how those play together is going to be so important. But what are some issues that you've seen down the line when companies have not done it early on enough? They start or they come to you. By the time you get involved, where are we sometimes in the process?
Well, I find it very common that a lot of these cannabis enterprises, they'll say, you know what, I'm not going to worry about filing tax returns right now. I'll deal with what I have to do with the state, with the city to keep my license active. Whatever I need to report with them, I'll report. Whatever I need to pay, I'll go ahead and pay. And I'll worry about taxes later, income taxes later. And it could be, for a new business, that it does take 2 or 3 years before the IRS or the Franchise Tax Board catches on that, oh, we've got a business here that should have been filing income tax returns and hasn't, okay? So now you're in a situation where, putting aside the tax code, 280E, I mean, if you don't file return on time, you're already adding 10% to whatever it is that you owe just by not filing on time. So, and if you haven't done this for 2 or 3 years, you can see how these penalties and interest are going to compound an already very unfavorable tax amount based on how the tax law applies in the cannabis industry. So it's really a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I think this is one of those areas that if you're not willing to spend the money and you kind of nickel and dime yourself at the beginning, you end up really paying for it tenfold in the long run.
That is exactly right. Exactly right.
Now, you mentioned 280E. We can dig into that a little bit. I know some people in the cannabis industry, should be familiar with this.
I hope so.
It's a big issue. And certainly, I think you've dealt a lot with the different aspects of it.
Yes.
So why don't we give a little intro for people who maybe aren't familiar or need a recap?
All right. So IRC, Internal Revenue Code Section 280E, basically is a section that says if you are involved in some kind of illegal enterprise, you can deduct your cost of goods sold. You can't deduct your operating expenses, but you can deduct your cost of goods sold. And this provision was enacted by Congress because back in the 80s, there was a drug dealer who, whether he got audited or he got discovered, but nevertheless, IRS examined his tax returns and said, well, you're involved in this illegal enterprise, and under Code Section 61, gross income is income, regardless of whether it's legal or it's illegal. It's still income. And so IRS said, but because your activity is illegal, we're not letting you deduct any expenses, not cost of goods sold, not operating expenses, nothing. Okay?
So of course the government wanted their piece, right? Yeah. They're like, even though this is income from an illegal source, we're not condoning this, but you still owe us taxes on that income.
They want it on the whole pie, okay? Because, here it is, okay, you earn this income, you figure, all right, I understand, I'm going to have to report the income, but at least if I had costs to produce that income, I should be able to deduct those costs from it.
And in a normal business, you would.
That's right. In a normal business, you would. So, so his counsel, they took this to tax court, and they litigated this in tax court. And the tax court ended up ruling that the way the IRS was acting was unconstitutional, because what we've signed up for as U.S. citizens is an income tax, not a gross receipts tax. And if you are going to tax this business without allowing for any deductions, okay, then that's an unconstitutional tax, gross receipts. So with that happening, Congress, of course, was not happy about this. How can we let drug dealers and people involved in illegal activity end up, if they get caught, they're going to be taxed the same way as everyone else? So that's how come 280E was created. And so the way that Congress got around this not being unconstitutional, at least in their minds, and it's still up for being tested in the courts, is, well, we'll allow you to deduct cost of goods sold. Okay? Well, that at a minimum makes sense, because let's say, like, if you're buying cannabis product, which is illegal under federal law, and you paid $80 for it, and you're going to turn around and sell it for $100, rightfully, your gross profit of $20 should be then taxed by the government, versus, before 280E, and with this case being, being ruled on by the tax court, IRS would have wanted to tax the full $100. Okay, so that's helped, being able to at least get the IRS to recognize that in 280E you do get to deduct cost of goods sold. Now, not all the agents are trained, to be able to audit a cannabis business. And I still get audit reports that clients will come to me. They were selected for an audit. Here's the report. They don't know what to do. And I see where the agents just disallowed every single expense. And the agent will put down, reason why? 280E, and or they didn't substantiate the expense. Okay.
And you say, this was the cost of goods sold.
Right.
This was one that is supposed to be deductible.
That's right.
And
That's right.
canceled.
That's right. So, so there are different theories, and depending upon what type of cannabis business you are, whether you're a cultivator, a manufacturer, distributor, retailer, there are different theories and accounting methods by which we could take some of those indirect costs or direct costs that aren't true, like cost of goods sold where you bought something for the 80. And so it could be that maybe some of the labor now can be allocated cost of goods sold. Maybe some of the rent space, some of the utilities, maybe there's production equipment that's utilized. You can go ahead and bring that in. If you're a grower, clearly you're going to have water bills, gas bills, that kind of stuff, because you're growing.
So are they allowing for those kinds of deductions in part?
Well, you have to fight for it.
Yeah.
You have to
get
fight
lucky
for
with the
it.
right examiner, and you fight for it.
That's
every
right.
step of the way.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Shady Creek Trading Company produces and distributes cannabis-infused wild meat jerky products. Co-created by Settlers Jerky founder, Shady Creek Trading Company is an infused jerky products and distribution corporation located in Nevada City, California. Nomad Jerky Bites is their premier product, a packaged pouch with hearty bites of ethically raised buffalo fortified with THC. Shady Creek Trading Company are the innovators of the infused meat jerky market. They are compliant by all FDA standards and use cured strips of real buffalo as opposed to pressed jerky. To learn more about Shady Creek and their current investment opportunity, please visit the Wrazel investment marketplace at wrazel.com.
Yeah, I know a lot of companies in the industry have been grappling with 280 since the beginning, and many of them came up with very complex corporate structures as a means to deal with this, to, in some cases, separate out any indirect costs that are not cost of goods sold outside of the license holding entity, so that with the theory that that was the only entity that was subject to 280E.
Right.
Whether or not that is going to hold in the long run is an open question, I think, still.
Right. Well, that's still being tested in the courts. Right now, the tax court hasn't been very favorable to that type of structure. So where you've got essentially a pie and you're slicing it up, so you got one slice touching the plant, and then you got other slices doing other things. Maybe you got one slice doing advertising. You got another slice that's handling payroll and stuff like that. If each of those slices, the service is only being done for that one slice that's touching, the plant, then the tax court's going to say, look, this is all just one and the same. It's one pie, and we're going to apply 280E to all the different slices.
So as opposed to like a management company or a service company that has a lot of different clients, maybe in different industries, and one of them happens to be yours, then they wouldn't be subject to it. But
Correct.
if it's clear that this entity only exists to provide the
Well,
service
that
to
argument hasn't been made yet to the tax court because those set of facts haven't been presented. But clearly, you would think, all right, hey, you and I, we're attorneys, and we represent not only cannabis cases but non-cannabis cases. We have our operating costs. We have our overhead. Does that mean that if 10% of your revenues come from cannabis, then that means you can't deduct 10% of your operating expenses because somehow 280E would apply to you? I think that would be a very hard argument for the IRS to win, in a court. But again, if you're only working for one cannabis company, then I think it'd be, clear that there could be a problem. Now, nothing's come up yet in the way of facts. Is let's say like all you do is you work as cannabis counsel to many different companies. They're unrelated. Could somehow the IRS be able to justify, all your expenses are not deductible under 280E? And, that's possible. But clearly where, and it hasn't been tested yet by the court, but clearly where you're doing all different kinds of legal work for cannabis and non-cannabis clients, I think the argument would be very hard for the IRS to go ahead and make that you can't deduct your expenses because of 280E, that it should apply to you.
Yeah, I mean, we can imagine circumstances that it would really feel unfair to push it that far, but this whole regime can feel very unfair.
Well,
we're talking about fairness.
There's no standard on fairness, okay? A lot of people will say paying taxes is unfair, period. So,
and yet, a lot of the motivation for, or at least from the state's perspective or from the government's perspective for legalization can be that tax revenue. You know, this is the really attractive part for them, this promise of all the money that they're going to get.
Right. Now, California, though, has got quite progressive in this area because starting with 2020, California is allowing cannabis businesses to deduct their operating costs. So now it doesn't matter whether you get it into cost of goods sold or not, at least for state income tax purposes, you're able to take that deduction.
Oh, that's great. That's great news. I love that.
So,
wow.
Which that's another reason why, too, because typically IRS is going to take the lead and IRS is going to audit a return first before the state does. And normally what happens is the results of that audit, whatever the final results are now, are provided to the state, and the state will just expect an amended state income tax return to be filed representing those federal results. Well, given that the standard of deductibility is different between the federal side and the state side, it would be most beneficial that in the course of the IRS audit, it's documented in such a way so that even though an expense may not be deductible for federal purposes because it's an operating expense, but for 280E, it would be deductible. And therefore now, when the state now looks at that report, compares it to the amended state income tax return that was filed, it's clear, okay, it was already addressed, but for 280E, they couldn't take the expense. But being that the state of California doesn't recognize 280E as an adjustment to income taxes, we allow the expenses.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. You want to document it, whether or not it's deductible at this
Right.
time right now.
Right.
Have all of that information there that you can point to later.
Right.
You said in connection with an amendment, is that are they allowing changes for?
Well, what
past
I was
years?
talking about was where you filed a return, the IRS selects you for an audit, the IRS conducts an audit. Now that audit's completed, you've agreed with whatever the adjustment is. Now you have up to 6 months to file an amended state income tax return with the state to reflect the audit adjustments. And that applies regardless of what industry you're in. Even if you were an individual and you were selected for an audit and there's changes, well, you got to amend your state income tax return. So that's where, that kind of documentation that I'm thinking of is that audit report's going to be very compelling to the state as to whether you did the amended income tax return right or not. Okay, so it's very important to make sure that that audit is specific enough to show that, hey, whatever deductions were denied, it was only because of 280E and not for some other reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But with regards to documentation and preparation when you start doing these tax returns, that's a key thing. You don't want to, 3 years later figure out, well, how did I get to this cost of goods sold number?
Mm-hmm.
How did I make this allocation? Those work papers should be put together at the time that the tax returns are being prepared.
Yeah, trying to recreate it later, you're not going to remember the details. And, I think one thing we talked about in our prior conversation was about investors potentially wanting to come in later. When you're a company that you're starting it yourself and then later you're looking at for somebody to potentially acquire you or to invest more money, they're going to expect that this information is in order.
That's correct. And, that's regardless of what industry you're in. I've done a lot of M&A deals. That's where I started out when I first started practicing law. And just the due diligence that any investor or any purchaser will be looking at. So it's there's so much pie in the sky there, but the bottom line is they're going to want to know. They're going to want to know what your tax compliance is, legal compliance, all that stuff. And it can be a real mess. And a lot of people will just say, look, if you don't have stuff organized and you can't answer my questions, why do I want to be in business with you? Why do I want to invest my money with you? So it's a real reflection, on the owner and being able to work with that owner if, in fact, now you're going to be investing in that person's business.
Absolutely. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I think this has all been really helpful information, hopefully, for our viewers. There's a lot to think about in this entire realm. And if they were a little overwhelmed, then maybe that's just an indication that tax specialists would be very helpful. But I think, having a little bit of an understanding about this is important for all of us. Anybody who's within the industry to at least understand that it is an issue and when to bring in somebody who's going to be able to get into the details with us on it. Why don't you let people know where they can find you?
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, there's a couple different ways to find me. So first of all, my website is cannabistaxattorney.com. So that would be www.cannabistaxattorney.com. And that will have all of my contact information, phone number, email address. So that would be the go-to way to go. My main office is in Irvine, but I do have satellite offices in Southern California as well as in Northern California. And now with the whole COVID-19 pandemic, it seems that video conferencing and telephone conferences, that seems to be a better way to go ahead and communicate.
Anybody, anywhere.
Yes, exactly. So I've incorporated those in my initial session meetings with, with clients and prospective clients. And what I say is early on, you should have your tax and legal expertise in place. And if it's somebody who's knowledgeable and somebody who's willing to work with you and has the experience, it should be able to be designed so that it's not like you have to have a full-time legal counsel or a full-time tax guy on your staff. And that's, I set up in a way in that you get that expertise, calling me, emailing me whenever you have a question, whenever you have something to be looked at or whatever. But there's no need to pay somebody full-time when you don't have that full-time amount of work needed. But very important work that needs to be done.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. It was great having you here today.
All right. Thank you for having me, Farah.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. This was The Higher Ground on the Wrazel Cannabis Broadcasting Network. Join us next time.